everyone, this is Kim with Kim Holland Homes. I am here today with Christopher Romano of Cassidy, Romano and Love. And this is the second part of my series of interviewing because I think it's really important that besides the information that I give out to the sellers and the buyers out there, that I actually get some more information from the people that are, in these fields, in these specific niche fields. So today we're going to be talking about 5 tips for sellers when dealing with attorneys. So Chris, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it.
So let's get right into it. So the first thing, of course, which is the most logical, is what should a seller look for when they are looking for an attorney to sell their house?
Sure. So a very common thing that you see often is that a seller might know a family member who's an attorney, but maybe they're a divorce attorney or a personal injury attorney or trust and estates attorney. Just like any other area of, say, medicine, any area of law is really a specialty. And so there's things that a real estate attorney is going to be able to know and do that another attorney is not going to do. And it really makes all the difference in the world. Real estate is incredibly competitive right now. Things have to be done quickly. You want to make sure you have somebody very attentive. Contracts have to get done, literally overnight. Whereas in other attorneys' PI cases, they'll put a case over for 3-4 months. They're not used to working at the same pace. And so it's very important to make sure that you have a really well-qualified real estate attorney.
So similar to 2 doctors, you wouldn't go to a podiatrist if you have an ophthalmologist issue, but they're both doctors.
100%.
Okay, awesome. Secondly, and I've had this come up a few times, so I had a cash sale. And my seller was expecting them to close, and then all of a sudden they turned around and they ended up waiting for the sale of their home to go ahead and to close our deal. Now, whether a cash loan, the seller was still expecting the deal to be closed within 30 days. Right. So how should a contract read if the seller is expecting a quick sale?
Sure. So quick sales, obviously, the majority of contracts drawn up in New York have on or about dates. And on or about dates generally give like a 30-day grace period to the buyer or the seller. Basically, no questions asked. And then if they don't close within that time, a time of the essence letter has to be served. And the case law for time of the essence letters is generally 10 to 14 business days. You serve the letter and then they have to close on that date. If you're really trying to secure a quick closing from the very beginning, instead of an on or about date, you can try doing a time of the essence closing date in the contract. That's very familiar when you buy at the auctions. That's very familiar when you buy REOs, bank-owned properties. They will say this must close, say, on January 15th, time is of the essence. And you have to close on that date. So that is what you would try to suggest in the contract. If your client really needs the money, needs to move out of town, whatever it is, you can say close January 15th, time is of the essence.
I've heard on or about, on or before.
Sure. So an on or about, and these things are more customary than codified in law, but an on or about generally is a 30-day grace period. Some attorneys even put that in the contract. On or about means 30-day, but it's usually customary for that. An on or before date would be another tactic where you can say an on or before date, you wouldn't have to wait until 30 days after the on or about date to serve that 10 or 14-day time of the essence letter. And on a before date, you can argue you can serve that time of the essence letter at the on or before date, whenever that date is. And that maybe would save you the 30 days of waiting before you serve the TOE letter.
Yes.
Everybody's
in a rush these days.
Everybody's in a rush. And it's not in stone, these things, but basically you can also try to either build in some sort of penalty that, the agreement was that you close in 30 days all cash. If you can't close, then you'll either carry my carrying costs past that day. There'll be $100 a day fee.
So the contracts can be written up to push it along.
Yeah, you can be very creative. Or you can try to incentivize them. Some people will not go for penalties or what they deem to be penalties, but you can incentivize. You can say, if you close on this date, it'll be this. If you close on this date, it'll either be a higher or I'll give you a credit if you close by a certain date.
Right, I see that a lot in descriptions of other agents where they'll say, we'll give a $2,500 credit or $1,000 credit if it can close by a certain date.
Yeah, a lot of investors will do that. I have some investors that do that because their carrying costs are $3,000 a month,
right,
and they need that money for another project, and they'll give them incentive to close on time. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
Great. Okay, so what happens actually if they go beyond the 30 days, beyond the on or about?
Once they go beyond the 30 days, usually wait till day 30 is there, then you can serve what's called a time of the essence letter. The time of the essence letter says it's been more than 30 days since the on or about date in the contract. Of course, you can't serve a time of the essence letter unless all parties are ready, willing, and able. And it's not necessarily all parties, but it's
Right,
if you're the seller, you have to make sure that your title's clear, that the house still conforms to the contract, and that the buyer has their mortgage commitment. But that's why the mortgage commitment date is only usually 30 days or 45 days. So if the buyer keeps extending his mortgage contingency date, saying, I need an extra 2 weeks, it still can, if the
Right.
contract was contingent upon a mortgage, you can't serve a time of the essence letter until that contingency is met.
right. The
So you
house
really-
has to be able to be closed
Correct.
for the letter.
Correct.
So let's talk about open permits that pop up. When I have listings, I always do a search for COs, permits, liens
Great job.
in the beginning because I don't need
Very smart. Yeah.
the deal blowing up in the middle or
Yeah.
in the 11th hour when we're 2.5 months into it.
Correct.
So I had 3 instances where I had the buyer and an extension came up from 1943. Something came up with a burner that was fixed in the 70s. Another situation where something came up with a cesspool in the 60s.
Yeah.
So all these things came up, but they were prior to when the sellers had actually purchased the homes.
Yeah.
So the sellers felt that it wasn't their responsibility to fix because
I
it was
bought
all
it like that.
they bought it like that, exactly.
I hear that. I can't tell you how many times over the last 20 years everybody thinks like it's grandfathered in.
Right,
It's not. Your attorney missed it.
right,
You missed it. Somebody missed it.
right.
And just because you bought it like that now doesn't convert something that was illegal to legal. You still have to deal with it. And so
So it's on the seller.
it is absolutely on the seller. Absolutely. And then, a few different ways. And yeah, unfortunately, it can be a permit that's 50 years old. We
Right.
just had one in Glen Cove, same thing. And what happens is when you take out a permit to do something, you take out the permit, you do the work. You might have submitted architectural plans. You might have did everything perfectly to code.
Right,
The only thing you didn't do is after all the work was done was call them to do a final inspection and close the permit out.
right,
And sometimes it's just that easy. But sometimes the work was never done
right.
and you have to prove to them, or sometimes it was done horribly.
Right,
And so what happens is to close out that open permit, they're going to come in, they're going to inspect, and they're going to tell you
how to fix.
how to fix. And everything was done to code, that's great. One of the bad things about having an open permit that old is that you may have conformed to town code at that time. Town code may have changed. So even if you built it perfectly at that time, now you have to conform to today's code.
Right.
So it's
And
it's a
codes,
challenge.
Codes are
but
changing every day.
yes, they are.
All right, so number 5, and this
Yes.
is always, a super important one for me. So walkthroughs
Mhm.
before the closing, they should be about 15 minutes or so. You're just checking, making sure there were no damages, that everything's the same from
Correct.
when you purchased the house.
That's correct.
So I had an instance where we went to the walkthrough and we knew that there was a second stove in the house. We knew
Right.
they had to take it out. So when we walked into the house, the area that had the second stove, they had ripped out the cabinets, the stove, the walls, the floor, capped the pipes. They didn't just rip out the stove, they ripped out the entire area.
Okay.
So, of course, my buyer was crying. I said,
Mhm.
let's just get to the table, we'll figure it out.
Yep.
And, the lender even came in at the closing to the table and showed the paperwork that said, just take the stove out permanently. So, what is the option for the buyer at that point when something is so drastically wrong at the walkthrough?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. When you sign a contract of sale, the contract of sale says the premises shall be delivered as is as the date hereof, which is the date that you sign the contract. And so when you do your walkthrough, you're supposed to go back to make sure it's the same as when you went into contract.
Right.
So if they can't deliver that, the seller is in breach of the contract, which means the buyer can refuse to close, can try to come up with a figure they think will reimburse them for the cost of all that, or maybe you can still close and then put a good enough amount of money in escrow to make sure that it's done post-closing.
So something like that, the buyer could say, walk away from the house. I don't want the house. because
Absolutely.
of this and get their down payment back?
Not necessarily get their down payment back, because you went to the closing, the seller couldn't deliver the house in the condition that you wanted, the condition that they had to by contract. You, as the buyer, now say you're in breach of the contract, but you're still not really under a time of the essence date, which means you could just adjourn it to close another day.
Right, and then fix it.
Correct.
Okay.
So you, as the buyer, could say, I do want out of the contract. I'm serving you with a 10 or 14 day notice,
Right.
and then say you must close by that date. And if they didn't have the work done by that date, then you can back out and get your down payment back. But if that seller comes and brings it all back to how it was, it'd be hard just to cancel and get your down payment back. I mean, you could argue it'll never be exactly the same, right? But at a certain point, you're splitting hairs, and so if they get it back substantially the way it was, it'd be hard just to cancel and get your down payment back.
All right. Well, this is hours of information that I don't even want to know what it would cost for somebody to get this information that we are delivering to you for free. This is Christopher Romano, partner of Cassidy, Romano Love. And, I have more information like this coming up, so stay tuned to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you hit the alert button, you'll get notifications anytime I have a new video coming up. Again, thank you, Christopher. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.